I would like to begin with thank the American Scandinavian Foundation and its president Edward Gallagher for inviting me to participate in this symposium, and also Patricia Berman for inviting me to write in the catalogue. It's a very, very great pleasure for me to being here for the first time, actually. In connection with the groundbreaking exhibition that Pat mentioned earlier, called Northern Light, shown in New York in 1982-1983, the eminent curator Kirk Varnedoe wrote this in the exhibition catalogue, I quote, "Developments in Scandinavian painting from 1880 to 1910 do not conform with the sequence of stylistic progress we know so well from the often described evolution of French Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. Scandinavian painters of the time took a different path to modernity. If we are to understand that path and these painters' places within early modern art, we must set aside our traditional ideas of the evolution of modern European painting and pay closer attention to what was local and particular to the Scandinavian situation." End quote. I must say I completely agree with Varnedoe. Oddly enough, the Swedish art historians who wrote in the catalogue for the exhibition did it in the same way that Varnedoe had criticized. Numerous comparisons are made between Scandinavian artists and the French avant-garde. For example, Eugène Jansson's brushwork is compared with that of Van Gogh. Jansson's paintings were also said to resemble those of Paul Signac and the Neo-Impressionists, and even the Italian futurist Boccioni. Such comparisons are probably made to show that the Swedish artists, in their formal construction of their paintings, were, so to say, as radical as their French contemporaries. In my opinion, however, such analyses are more or less uninteresting. I think they can at worst obscure the interesting characteristics of the Swedish artist's work. In this lecture, I will instead discuss two Swedish artists in the context of the contemporary society, and I will base my discussion on three concepts: memory, modernity, and national identity. I will discuss some paintings by Eugène Jansson, who was represented by no fewer than 5 paintings in the Northern Light exhibition. And to the left we see Jansson's famous self-portrait from 1901. The second artist to the right, Nils Kreuger, was not included in that exhibition, but is representative of what I think is one of his most famous or best works in this year's show. We here see Richard Berg's portrait of Nils Kreuger, painted in 1883. The difference in the model's look can lead us to believe that we see two artists with radically different artistic temperaments. Kreuger here appears as a typical representative of the plein air painting of the 1880s. You please note the oil sketches behind the artist. Jansson instead appears, I think, as a typical example of the introvert artist of the end of the century. This is, however, not a true picture. Jansson and Kreuger were actually close friends. They exhibited together, and they were often compared by the contemporary critics. Some of their paintings even also look quite similar. Already during their lifetime, the story was told how the two artists together would walk through Stockholm at night. Back in the studio, especially Eugène Jansson should, from memory, have painted what he had seen during these walks. It's not easy to trace the origin of these stories, often retold in the literature on the two artists. However, already in 1898, Richard Berg's wife, Gerda, in a letter wrote that Jansson painted from memory. To paint from memory, of course, was a main idea in the symbolist movement at the end of the 19th century. The artist should not, as before, paint what they saw, but instead, so to say, capture the soul of the chosen motif. Today it's difficult to know how much truth there is in these stories. Some of Eugène Jansson's paintings, for example the one on the right, could possibly have been painted in this way, even if I doubt even that. Other, as the one to the left, must surely be based on drawings or sketches. Both Jansson and Kreuger had been trained in a naturalist mood, and I think that this background is more important for an understanding of their paintings than if they painted from memory or not. For example, both were extremely interested in different optical phenomena, ranging from lightning to street lights, things that requires an intensive observation to be depicted. When the two artists in 1898 appeared together in a solo exhibition in Stockholm, the idea that the artists painted from memory seems not to have been a topic much discussed. Their similar technique was by one critic instead described as a consequence of simplification. I would argue that the idea of painting from memory, also a concept derived from French painting of the time, has obscured the fact that the two artists attentively watched what was then going on in Stockholm. Which were then the most striking changes in Stockholm during the period when the two artists during the nights strolled through the city? Well, that was a time when the society and also the urban landscape went through great changes. As in Paris at this time, a new town plan was launched for Stockholm, which meant that old buildings were demolished and replaced by new houses between wide boulevards. The Industrial Revolution also meant that a multitude of new industrial buildings were built. One of the leading engineering companies was Ludwigsberg's Verkstäder, the factory of Ludwigsberg. Among other things, they had in 1892 produced the first Swedish chiller. This chiller was delivered to Münchenbryggeriet, an important representative of the, at that time, expanding brewing industry. For Münchenbryggeriet, a new building, as we see here in Renaissance style, was built in 1893. There are several paintings by Jansson where you can discover signs of this recent change in the urban landscape. Jansson often went up on the Mariaberget, situated at the south side of Stockholm, where you could see the chimneys of the new factories silhouetted against the horizon, as you can see in these two paintings by Jansson. In these paintings from the Tirska Galleriet in Stockholm, we can actually discover the buildings of both Ludwigsbergs Verkstäder and those of Münchenbryggeriet situated nearby. I think that many contemporary viewers of this painting must have perceived these buildings as obvious signs of the emerging modernity at that time. Another change in the city was the increase in street lighting. Initially, this was created mainly with the help of gas and oil, but electricity made its appearance in 1881. One can from these contemporary photographs understand what the sensation the inhabitants of Stockholm must have experienced by this new technique. Jansson's habit of painting these bursts of light, these signs of modernity, has attracted much attention from art historians. Often it is the lively traces of his brushwork that has been discussed in the literature, and then often have been compared with that of Edvard Munch, as in these two paintings. The Swedish art historian Ulf Linde, however, also believes that the lights testified to Jansson's fascination with the new technology. I would argue that also the contemporary viewers must have seen these lights in Jansson's paintings as signs of modernity. In some of Jansson's paintings, the street lights function as a kind of target for a forward movement into the pictorial space. The optimistic vision of the future was at that time, as one of my PhD students have pointed out, in the contemporary newspapers often described as a movement upwards, forwards. That is a similar kind of movement that we find in some of Jansson's paintings. The sense of such a movement could, as in these pictures, also be reinforced by a cyclist or a train. When the new streets were laid out, new buildings were erected. Here we see Hornsgatan in the southern part of Stockholm, a street that went through such a process. No, I did that again. I'm very sorry. I'm sorry for that. The Industrial Revolution also called for new apartment houses for workers. Jansson was a pioneer in choosing to depict such buildings. I think that his paintings appears as a kind of visions of the future. Also in many of Nils Kreuger's paintings there are signs of the emerging modernity. However, neither industrial buildings nor the electric light seems to have been his main interest. Throughout his career, however, Kreuger showed an interest in the field of transport. In a series of his paintings, the contemporary viewer could follow the modernization of transport. Already in Paris, as we see in this painting, Kreuger has depicted horses pulling heavy loads through the city. In his paintings from the Stockholm night, Kreuger showed how the use of horses for transport became more organized. You can see how the horses are waiting for their customers. At this time, however, a new means of transport, the tram, became visible in Stockholm. The tram network has been established there in 1877. At the beginning, the vehicles were drawn by horses. Later came the steam engine, and finally in 1901 the tram was electrified. In this painting from 1901, Kreuger has depicted a steam tram at the steep slope of Hornsgatan. This street was actually too steep for the horses. In the concept of modernity, you could also include efforts to increase the comfort for the people. in 1883, a strong sign of modernity, the elevator Katarinahissen, was inaugurated. The elevator connects Slussen with Mosebacke Torg, situated higher up in the city. In a small painting, Kreuger depicted this novelty. The lift as a sign of modernity emerged from the fog like a vision of the future. But how can these signs of modernity be linked to national building, the theme of this session? In Swedish art history writing, it was Sixten Strömbom who linked the concept of national romanticism to the Swedish art of the 1890s. For many of the artists that Strömbom wrote about, the construction of national identity included a look backwards at the older history of Sweden. It was, however, not the traditional history painting that attracted the young artists. Instead, history was connected with the landscape. For example, Carl Nordström, to the left, described the old Vasa castle in Varberg at the west coast of Sweden as a sign of Swedish history. Richard Berg, on the right, in a famous painting, let a Viking fleet show up outside the medieval city of Visby. This kind of national nostalgia is not found in Jansson's or Kreuger's paintings. Instead, they directed their gaze forward rather than backwards. They watched the ongoing changes that in the future would lead to a new and different society. When they walked through Stockholm at night, they discovered different kinds of evidence of technological and political change. In addition to wide streets with street lights, new factories, apartment buildings, and trams, they also discovered and sympathized with the labor movement's struggle for equal voting rights and democratization of the society. To the right, you see a famous painting by Jansson of a demonstration in Stockholm. I think their paintings can be interpreted as optimistic signs of a better future. In creating a Swedish national identity, their paintings witness the possibility of a better society. This could, of course, the two artists at that time only guess. But for those who looked at their paintings, many signs of the modernity that should in due time transform Sweden from an agricultural society to a modern industrialized state were in many ways present. Thank you.